we go. And we'll turn it over to you, Tony.
All right. Well, hello, and thank you so much for joining. I just told the folks in the breakout room that, this is really meant to be a collaborative session. So when we get to the end and questions, please, please, please ask questions. If you have questions and you don't want to forget it, go ahead and drop it in the chat. We'll make sure that they get addressed at the end. But really, the magic, I believe, happens in these types of sessions when we talk about the questions, because those are the things that you're really thinking of. Those are the situations where you're taking ideas and concepts that are typically presented and you're trying to apply them in your own world. So I really, really appreciate questions. Ask away. I think we'll have plenty of time for it and so on. So with that, I'm going to dive right in. Quick introduction. I started RevUp Sales just over 2 years ago. RevUp Sales is a sales enablement slash sales growth consultancy. I am technically a solopreneur, so a company of one, and I have 3 additional delivery partners as well. But I started RevUp Sales really as a means to provide tactical support to companies of all sizes in ways that took ideas and concepts and different methodologies and actually helped implemented them. One of the challenges that I saw throughout my career is I would go to a sales training, there'd be some cool ideas, some things that sound really great, and then they're kind of gone by the next week. And so, there's a huge need out there for folks to take all this great knowledge that's out there in terms of sales methodologies, sales approaches, and actually start to implement them in their daily workflow. So my background is 15 plus years in B2B sales. About half of that spent as an individual contributor, so as a rep, selling into mid-market enterprise across various industries, from financial services to sports technology to agile transformation services to accounts receivable software. So experience kind of spanning different industries and different roles beyond individual contributor, sales management, sales leadership, head of enablement. And then in 2023, I became certified in a sales methodology called Gap Selling as a trainer and coach. If any of you are really interested in sales and sales methodologies and have not heard of Gap Selling, that is the methodology that I do recommend. I believe it's very comprehensive and really speaks to how to understand motivation and how to understand customer motivation to buy. And so there's other great methodologies out there, but for me, gap selling is the one that can really be implemented no matter what you're selling. And then a little bit about RevUp Sales. We currently serve around 20 clients. Over the last year, we've worked with folks in over 9 countries, or I think we're almost going to get our 10th one here very soon. And so what's great is I get the benefit of sharing things that I learned from each client with other clients and with all of you folks. So that's a little bit about me. I'm excited to share this topic with you, which is around using this deal system, D-E.A.L. We're going to get into that here in a second. But really what we're talking about is later stage sales. And so when you do engage in customer conversations and you do have someone interested in a product or service, how do we make sure that they buy? And how can we make sure that we accurately forecast that they are going to buy? Because here's the reality. In sales today, it's getting very challenging. Like it's getting very challenging to generate pipeline. With technology and the rise of tools, it's become more than ever to get through from an outbound perspective using email and the phone. It's causing a lot of unpredictable growth, especially for startups. When investors are investing in companies and they're investing in growth, it's becoming increasingly challenging to be able to deliver on that predictable growth. And I see Tyler smiling. Maybe it resonates with him a little bit here. And with that challenge is coming low win rates. We're talking the average B2B sales is like 20% or lower in terms of win rates when the times a customer comes to your company, is interested, you do a discovery. By the time they buy, it's only like 20% that are actually making it through the process, which is causing more challenges throughout the growth engine. And then finally, there's a lot of outside influences. I believe that sales is a lot different today than it was just 5, 6 years ago, even not to mention, 10 or 20, even just 4, 5, 6 years ago, sales is very different today around all of these outside influences. And so I'm not here to just say everything's bad. I'm here to lay the groundwork in terms of like why this is important and how we're going to start to address some of these challenges that we're seeing in B2B sales. And the common challenges that we're seeing in the sense of, customers that are coming into our sales pipeline do show interest, but not really following through and not really coming through. There's some common challenges here that we need to try to address. First one being we're all getting fewer leads, fewer meetings, smaller pipelines. There's a lot of email activity flying around out there. There's a lot of new tools that help us send more emails than ever. But at the end of the day, research through Gartner, Forrester, I have another consultant, pal of mine, who does research on this. Just getting discovery meetings is down like 30% over the last couple years. So we're just getting fewer leads, fewer meetings, and we're having to deal with smaller pipelines. Most of our team is also has this responsibility of full cycle. So whether you're founder-led sales or a small sales team, typically those reps are tasked with everything from prospecting all the way through to closing a deal. So it makes it very difficult to provide specialization or focus on key areas of the pipeline. It's becoming very unpredictable. There's mixed results from marketing and enablement. And, I think from a sales perspective, everyone is really still figuring out where to lean into AI and where to not lean into AI. It's been a huge boom here throughout all industries, but I think for sales, there's a new tool spinning up every day. I get people contacting me, hey, could you check this out every day? And so I think we're still trying to see how we're going to best use AI. And current systems out there that we use to do deal management and forecasting just haven't worked. They just don't work anymore. They're just very complicated and they're not easy to use. So at the end of the day, what's really happening is we are losing control of the sale. We are leaving the decision on whether or not the sale is going to happen up to the buyer primarily. And I know you might be thinking to yourself, no, that doesn't make sense. I'm not leaving it up to the buyer. But one thing we have to recognize is that we have a buyer and seller relationship. Buyer is coming to solve a problem that they can't achieve on their own. Seller then, on the other hand, is there to help the buyer understand if their product or service can really do that. And so the buyer is maintaining certain level of information that they might not be telling the seller, and the seller is sharing information, and we hope that the buyer is connecting the dots. However, we don't know if they're connecting the dots properly or how they should be. And so that's really the opportunity for salespeople to really get better at taking control of the sale. That's what I mean by taking control of the sale. I want to lead the effort and make sure that the prospect is connecting the dots the right way. So some traditional popular deal management frameworks out there today try to get better at being able to forecast when a deal is going to come in, if a deal is going to come in, but there are some clear shortcomings of it. And especially as we look towards different sales motions, we can get overly complicated here pretty quickly in the sense of really trying to understand and predict if a deal is going to come in, if I should feel confident a deal is going to come in, and so on. And so some of those challenges and why I created a new way to think about forecasting and why I created the deal system is really to address these shortcomings. First off, outdated and complicated. Really, what that means is complicated and outdated in the way that organizations buy today. Today, everything is decision by committee, for the most part, even for small sales. Oftentimes, these frameworks are read somewhere and then implemented incorrectly. Many of these systems tend to be seller focused and not buyer focused. They tend to be self-serving. Hey, I want to get this data about you. Hey, I want to know this about you. But they don't really motivate buyers. And this is a key thing here. It does not really address a business case for change. Why does that buyer need to change from what they're doing today? In B2B sales and actually in B2C sales as well, our number one competitor is the status quo. Our number one competitor is change, and our number one competitor is motivating that prospect or that buyer with understanding that they need to change in order to make the sale. And then there's a couple other challenges here, but really what it comes down to is this is what I hear very commonly when I talk to teams about, hey, which deals are you going to close this month or this quarter? They start to tell me about their deals, and I hear things like this deal is going to come in. The prospect was very interested. Or I feel really good about this one. Or the call went really, really well. Or the demo went really, really well. Or my main point of contact says the CFO is going to approve this. Or they have to make a decision soon. These are all like really, really positive things that make us get happy years. And we tend to try to forecast with, but at the end of the day, this is all subjective information. This subjectivity is the main culprit of inaccurate forecasts, of missing quotas, of thinking that we're going to get to X number of dollars this month and coming up 50, 60% short. It's because we've injected too much subjectivity into the sales process. And it's really time to look at sales in a very objective way. So we have to remove hope. We have to remove subjectivity. We have to remove our assumptions, our gut feel, and our emotions if we're going to actually start to predict which deals are going to come in. And conversely, also know if a deal is not ready to come in, what we have to do to make us feel good that it is going to come in. And so today's focus is really on that deal side. And just to give you a sense for this, this kind of fits into your full sales motion. So your sales motion starts with developing your ICP. It goes into how you actually approach customers, what your internal sales process is. And then finally, what we're going to talk about today is deal management and forecasting. And so I want to show this just to kind of show where this fits in into the full sales motion. You know, this we're talking late stage today. We're talking conversations have already started. How do we make sure that we're forecasting accurately and that we're doing what we can to make sure deals close? But I wanted to show this just to show how this connects throughout the entire sales motion. And this deal management and forecasting system that I'm going to show you, it can flex a little bit based on how these other pieces of your sales playbook or sales motion kind of come together. All right, the other thing I want to mention here, when we think about how we're going to drive change or how we're going to implement something new, is we have to think about new ideas, not in the sense of frameworks. Frameworks are what we see in books, what we see online. Frameworks are concepts, methodologies. These things are meant to have broad use. The way that I like to think of things, especially when we're trying to change or do something differently, is we want to think about systems and we want to think about how do we create environments that will help us embrace change so that we can actually change. And so this deal system, it's called a system for a reason because it can actually operate in an imperfect environment. In the sales arena, when you're on a call with a potential prospect, that is entirely unpredictable. And so you can never get everything. A deal will never be perfect. And so these systems are designed to do that. So let's get into the system. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of go through some of the high level stuff here. But foundationally, this deal progress system, D.E.A.L, it's meant to align our objectives between buyers and sellers. It's meant to improve the way that we interact, even if it's not perfect. We're trying to create common language for how we talk about deals. We want to remove that subjectivity. We want it to be objective. And time and time again, this has been proven to be very, very accurate. I say 90%. The folks that I've actually implemented this with, it's probably more like 95, to be honest, if done properly. The key thing is you have to remove subjectivity, can only be objective information. So let's get into it. So as you can imagine, D.E.A.L, there's 4 things. So every deal needs to really address these 4 areas in an objective way. The first one, the D, is to develop the business case. And the best way to position this is, why should they change? And when I say develop the business case, this is something that you should be able to share with your prospect and anybody else on the buying committee, and they would all agree with. So developing the business case is really around uncovering objective reasons why they need to change, quantifying pains and problems, understanding the impacts, and really helping the buyer understand why they can't wait, why they can't continue without this product or solution. So developing the business case is really around answering these 3 questions. First, why do they have to change? Number 2, why can't they do that reason why they have to change on their own with the resources they have, or the tools they have, or the competitor of yours they have? And number 3, why do they have to do it now? So a solid business case answers those 3 questions for your buyer. Imagine that your point of contact or your buyer is going to take that and just give it directly to their CFO. Their CFO is going to say, yep, this is why I need to buy this. All right, the E in the deal progress system is engage the buying committee. Sounds pretty simple, but if you stop and think about deals you're actually working today, oftentimes we are stuck with one main point of contact, and we are stuck selling through that individual. And so engaging the buying committee is all about you taking the lead and showing the prospect that you know who should be involved. You know who should be involved. You want to try to get direct access to the committee, in any way you can. And in the case that you are still stuck selling through a main point of contact, you want to make sure that you enable that person properly. So you'll see here this whole point system that we're going to see, it kind of has some flex depending on where you're at. The A is to align your solution. Now, I'll go ahead and admit, align your solution. This is the easiest thing to get right. This is the easiest point of the point system to get right. This is really around, how is your product or service going to specifically fix their pains that they're dealing with? Now, those pains or problems that they're dealing with, those are things that you should uncover under the D in developing the business case. So when it comes time to position your product or service, it's very targeted, it's very specific. That's why the A is part of the deal progress system. And finally, the L is lock in the timeline. The timeline is important, not from a, hey, when should we have our next call? The timeline is important to establish with your buyers on when they want to have the thing fixed or when they want to achieve the goal, and helping them work backwards through their onboarding process, through their internal buying process, through their stakeholders and who all needs to get involved, to help them understand and establish what that timeline should be. Because oftentimes what happens is our buyers don't really know how much is involved or how long it's going to take. They just know, yeah, I want to fix that thing by next quarter. But when you take the time and you actually walk them through it and walk backwards, that might mean like, holy cow, we can't wait 2 weeks to have this next call. We probably have to do it next week, or we have to do it tomorrow, instead of waiting another week. So locking in the timeline helps you set proper expectations with yourselves and with forecasting, but also with the buyer. And so all of these things come together in a point system. So each section gets a point for complete information, partial information, or no information. And as you add all these up, you have a total deal score of 4 points. Remember, this is objective information. So if at any point you believe you have certain information here, you should be able to repeat it back to the buyer and they would agree, yes, that's what I said. Yes, that's what we agreed to. So that's the kicker. And then in terms of the deal score, 4-point scale, need a minimum score of 2.5 to consider this a potential deal to forecast. So if this thing does not have a 2.5, I wouldn't I wouldn't think that it's going to come in. And here's typically how this plays out. You get a full point for the A usually. You can align your solution. Now all you need is partially confirmed information for the 3. But believe it or not, if you were to remove the assumptions, remove the blinders, easier said than done. But in practice, if you can start to round out your deal, even with partial information around those three things, it works. You can start to forecast it. Now, the real powerful one here is if you can get a full point on developing the business case. If you get that thing locked in with numbers, data, statistics, and you've aligned your solution specifically, guess what? Now you can influence your engagement to the buying committee, and now you have a higher influence to lock in the timeline. So that's how all of these key pieces really come together and play together is I could scratch the surface on all of these and maybe forecast a deal, but if I can lock in the business case and I can lock in the alignment on our solution, I have the ability to now dictate who's going to be involved and when, because I have such a good handle on the business case. So these things all come together, but at the end of the day, 2.5 or better to move the deal. I've seen deals where align your solution is 1 and we have access to the committee. And guess what? It's okay that we only know a little bit about the business case, but it's the fact that we have direct access and we can sell directly to them. We can address their needs. That gives us enough to kind of push us over the edge there. And so I started talking through these already, but I didn't realize I had a slide on them. But, high level, those are the reasons why this system really works. And at the end of the day, nothing is perfect. You'll have a lot of deals that don't get to 4 points. You'll have deals that maybe only get to 1 point and you close. But this system is going to be very beneficial for 95+% of your deals on really assessing where you're at from an objective standpoint and then what else you need to get. So this is part forecasting system, but more importantly, coaching tool to understand, what else we got to do. What are the questions we have to get answered? And then I'll go through this pretty quickly, but this scale can be implemented in a variety of different ways. Certainly, if you're ever talking about deals, you can start to talk about deals around these 4 pillars. You can add these fields to a CRM, just 1 or 2 sentences on what's the business case, who are we engaged with. So it's very simple to just start to do some of this. And then, of course, there's all kinds of AI tools out there, call recording systems that you can use for tagging and stuff like that, to start to automate some of this. But it's very much a crawl, walk, run approach in terms of starting to use it. You can start to talk about it, you can start to document some of it, and you can start to integrate it into your day-to-day. The easiest way to start to get the information from your prospects and start to answer some of those questions you have is to really stop and think, what is the next win that I have to accomplish here? And this next win is not the next step. For example, the prospect says, hey, thank you for this. Thank you for sharing all this. I'm going to share this with my team and get back to you. Oftentimes we think, okay, great, that's awesome. I'm going to follow up with you next week. And we might think the next step is a follow-up next week. But in reality, what the next win is the prospect books the meeting internally and they present to the team. So that's actually what needs to happen before we can move our deal forward. And so when you think about the next win in this way, how to use that is to say, okay, how do I make sure that that happens? And so if I'm focused on the next win, I'm going to enable that conversation a little bit differently. I'm not going to say, okay, I'm going to follow up with you next week. I'm going to say something more like, okay, what do you think they're going to be most interested in? What are they going to push back on? When are you planning to meet on them? I'll send you a one pager that basically summarizes what you just told me so that you can present effectively to them. If you're going to meet with them next week, should I follow up with you the Monday after? Right. So you see how we're trying to just add clarity, definition, and objective to our conversations. All right. That's all I got. Sorry I took up so much time.
Tony, it was great. So let's go through some of the questions that are in the chat.
Yeah,
If you're seeing that.
I got them. Let's start at the top here. Our slides available at the end. I believe so.
Yep, we'll send those out.
Email has become so difficult. Yes, agree. That's actually it's the product of all the software, really. Is this data software focused? This deal system can be applied to any sale. I have clients who sell services. I have clients who sell software. I have clients who sell assessments, and they all can apply this in their own way. And that's really why I think it's been proven to be so effective. The only thing that might change is like how you do certain things. So like how you find the business case might be different from what you sell versus someone else. Do you know if the smaller pipelines are creating the same amount of sales or closes down as well? Taylor, can you maybe clarify that question real quick?
Yeah, in one of your slides, you said that the trend is that smaller pipelines are being seen. I was wondering about is the outcome of that just less sales, or is it that the smaller pipeline means that it's more efficient, you're getting the same number of sales, but not having to deal with so many people who aren't ideal buyers?
Yeah, good question. I think it depends on the company. The companies who are trying to address this issue of top of funnel, so of hey, we're not getting enough leads. I think they're finally coming around to we need to really improve our conversion rates, and those are typically like the organizations I'm engaged with is like we want to start there. Like we need to improve conversion rates because we know we're not getting enough top of funnel. So like, yeah, to some extent, some people are saying we don't expect our pipelines to just miraculously grow. So like we've got to do something on the conversion rate side. And then the smaller pipeline comment there was also a result of outbound being so much more difficult than, say 4 or 5 years ago. And then even before that, the rise of the email automation tools really started like around 2015, 2016. And, it had like a good 3, 4 year run. And then now we're on the backside of that, the additional 3, 4 years after that. Have you seen this framework work well for super small teams like 5 people? Absolutely. I mean, I use this framework as a solopreneur, as when I talk to clients, I'm thinking about my deals in that way. This can work for anybody. It can work if you're founder-led sales. It can work if you have someone selling on your team. This really is just kind of like I said, it's more of a system. It's a way of thinking and operating, within that imperfect system. Like, in some cases, if I'm talking to a client and maybe it's not the best fit for me, I've already institutionalized that, hey, I don't really have the A here. Like my solution doesn't really align. Like, sure, I think I can help this organization, but I'm not going to expect it to come in, or I'm not going to forecast it. And same thing goes for timeline, especially timeline. It's like, well, I know that they've got all these things going on. Actually, they should probably take care of some other things first before they hire me. So, it's more of just like a way of thinking and trying to bring some objectivity to the deal side of things. And it could be used by one person team or, 1,000 person team. Do you think AI is going to replace forecasting frameworks eventually? It looks like someone else liked that one. Well, yes and no. I mean, there are AI tools that have already kind of taken over, implementing some of these frameworks. This framework, the D.E.A.L framework, is already in a solution recently. But here's my take, and it's maybe more of an AI take on sales. It's like getting the data into a location is not the real answer of like what AI is for. Like if AI is used to get data into a system, or AI is used to, hey, look, boss, I organize my notes according to this D.E.A.L framework, like that's not going to actually drive outcomes and impacts. So how AI can be used for something like this is, at the same time we're programming AI along this framework, what we've done is we've also programmed the questions that we need answered along this to identify if we have zero or no info, partial info, or full info. We can program AI according to certain questions that apply in our industry or for our product or service, that operates and help us on the coaching side, like, oh, try to get this information next time you talk to your contact or the buying committee, etc. But I don't know if AI will completely replace uh, forecasting, because we still have buyers who are not buying using computers. Buyers are still buying with their own human interaction, and with human interaction from multiple people. So until AI takes over the buying process, I think there's still some help needed from just the human side. From point of first contact, how much time should you pass before you're ready to report a score? Oh, cool question. Perfect. So I think you can start to do a score even from discovery. I don't think you can do it from like a cold call necessarily, or just like sending emails, or based on like, prospect fit. But I think once you start discovery and you really have like a start to understand, what's going on in their environment, you can start the initial score. And so let's just say in discovery, you get part of the business case, you talk a little bit about the solution, and you learn a little bit more about the committee. You may only have like that deal being scored like a 0.5 or a 1, right? So you may have a pretty low score at that point. But it's important to note that, and it's important to look at it against the other areas of the D.E.A.L system to understand, okay, now I have a path to what else I need to understand to increase my confidence level that this is going to come in. And I would say every interaction you have with the prospect, based on what you get, what you're able to share, and what you're able to objectively confirm, that's when you should update the score. So that score is kind of a living thing that should update for each interaction. And then till most teams you work with reach a 2.5, that's a very really much depends. I think business case, the D part of that drives a lot of how fast things can go. But you can get a 2.5 after discovery if discovery is done in the right way. But oftentimes, this very much follows your sales process. So your average sales process is 3 months. You can expect that, your deal score should be reaching that 2.5, within that end of the second month, early the third month type of time frame. Have you considered a standard D.E.A.L version of D.E.A.L format? So Joel, yeah, I mean, it's already been built out in one system called Pod, Pod. There's new ones popping up every day. There's probably 20 that can be added to right now, but for right now, it has been added to a system called Pod. And I'm very open to it, but I want teams to understand that there's more to it than just getting the information. Like the way that you think about deals, the way that you approach sales is this learning system. And so if you believe that humans will continue to be part of your sales process, if you believe that you will continue to have a sales team and humans doing that, this system is more about the teaching and the thinking than the data on the paper. So I hope that answered the question in terms of like what, using AI to kind of train this and get better at it. But then there's this other piece where if humans are going to be involved, like we also need them to learn from it and actually evolve from it. All right, I think we got through the chat. What other questions, or if we're at time, we can stop too. But this has been great. Thank you so much for the questions. I'll turn it over to Spencer, whatever,
Let's
if you
take,
want more
yeah, if
time
you got
or.
a question, come off mute. Let's take a couple more questions. While someone's coming off mute there, you talked about, small steps to get started. What are two things that people can do today? I mean, you've alluded to it, but if I'm on a sales call later today, so a couple of tips and how to get the next date, the next call.
Yep. So I would say tip number one would be to think about the next win. So, or the next yes is another way to think of it. The next little mini sale that needs to happen to move this forward. And when you think of it, do a quick check and say, is there something before that? So remember our example, prospect said, hey, this sounds great. I'm going to share this with my team and get back to you. Our initial reaction is something like, great, I'll follow up with you next week. The next yes is actually the fact that they need to present it to the team or book the meeting and present it to the team. So if you identify that little next yes and win, now you can enable that to happen. And so I would say that's the first tip is really get specific around what needs to happen and making sure that you're enabling that to happen. The other tip that I have is always, whatever you can do, get things quantified and defined. So whenever you hear phrases or thoughts or comments that either should have a number or should have a definition, don't let those things go breezing by in the conversation, especially if you think it's going to be important for what your product or service sells or solves. You always want to get specifics and get things defined, quantified, because, in a sales conversation, when someone says something like, oh, we're dealing with a lot of issues with our current supplier, their perception of a lot of issues and my perception of a lot of issues could be very different. And simply asking the fact, what kind of issues are you referring to? Or how often do these issues happen, right? Just those little things of trying to get things defined and quantified can completely change the conversation and can completely change your business case for why they should buy. And it all goes back to this thought that I mentioned at the beginning. All of this stuff is going to happen regardless. Like at some point, the buyer is going to try to do this on their own. They're going to try to connect the dots on their own. We're doing these things so that we can do more of the dot connecting for them, or we can help them do the dot connecting, because that's how we help ourselves increase win rates, win more deals, is by making sure that the prospect is looking at our product or solution in the right way that they should be.
Love it. Thank you. Other questions? Okay, then that's a wrap. Thanks, Tony. Thanks everyone for coming in. Go out and follow the Midday Connect on LinkedIn. You'll see recordings and updates, and then look for an email from Hannah later this week on today's session. We'll see you all
Thanks,
next.
Tony.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate your engagement.
Thank you.